Have you ever stopped to wonder why the Bible mentions spices so often? Frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, saffron. These aren't just kitchen flavors. In the ancient world, they were treasures so valuable they could rival gold itself. In fact, without these spices, entire economies would collapse, temples would lose their incense, and kings would lose their bargaining power. But here's the question. How did these rare and exotic products, grown in distant lands, find their way into the very heart of Israel's worship and daily life? Stay with me, because today we're going to uncover the ancient trade routes, the biblical spice secrets that changed history forever. Imagine a world where a sprinkle of cinnamon was worth a king's ransom, where a small jar of frankincense resin might take months of travel and the lives of dozens of men to secure. This wasn't just flavoring, it was wealth, medicine, worship, and power, all rolled into one. Exodus 30:34 records the holy incense recipe given by God himself. Take fragrant spices, gum resin, onycha, and galbanum, and pure frankincense, all in equal amounts. These weren't local products. They came from deserts, mountains, and even across seas. Their presence in the temple tells us that Israel was tied into a massive international network of trade long before we imagine globalization existed. Now picture the journeys of the traders. Caravans of camels loaded down with sacks of incense lumbering across the Arabian Desert, guided by stars and the promise of water at the next oasis. Or daring mariners sailing from the Horn of Africa and India, hugging coastlines and braving monsoon winds to bring saffron, cardamom, and cinnamon to distant markets. 1 Kings 10:11 even notes that Solomon's fleet of ships brought back almug wood, spices, and gold from Ophir, a land many scholars believe was in Arabia or East Africa. These weren't just spice runs, they were perilous adventures where fortunes could be made or lost. Can you imagine the scene when those caravans finally arrived? Bustling markets filled with traders speaking dozens of languages, their stalls overflowing with goods that carried the scents of faraway lands. Merchants haggling over small lumps of myrrh, priests carefully selecting incense for temple rituals, and kings calculating how to tax the flow of these treasures. To hold a pouch of saffron threads was to hold power. To burn incense in a temple was to release the very fragrance of wealth into the heavens. But what about the specific spices named in Scripture? Frankincense and myrrh, famously given to the infant Jesus by the Magi in Matthew 2:11, came from trees in southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa. That means that when the wise men brought their gifts, they were carrying products that had traveled hundreds, if not thousands, of miles before ever reaching Bethlehem. Saffron, mentioned in Song of Solomon 4:14, originated from regions as far away as Persia and Kashmir. Cinnamon and cassia, found in Exodus 30:23, likely came from Sri Lanka and India. These aren't just details. They are proof that biblical Israel was plugged into a global web of trade stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Skeptics have long argued that the Bible's references to far-off spices were little more than poetic embellishments, metaphors rather than real history. After all, how could a relatively small nation like ancient Israel, caught between much larger powers like Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, really participate in global trade? To them, the idea that frankincense from Arabia, cinnamon from India, or saffron from Persia could have made their way into Israelite markets seemed implausible. The desert was harsh, the sea routes dangerous, and Israel itself lacked the sprawling fleets or imperial armies of its neighbors. From a purely human perspective, the claim looked far-fetched, almost too grand for a kingdom the size of Judah or Israel. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. For years, some skeptics claimed these biblical references were exaggerated. How could a small kingdom in the Levant possibly have access to goods from India, Africa, or Arabia? But archaeology keeps pulling back the curtain. In 2023, residue analysis of ancient storage jars in Israel revealed traces of exotic spices not native to the region. This means the Bible wasn't exaggerating. Israel really was receiving products from far-flung lands through vast networks of exchange. Think about the cultural ripples. These trade routes didn't just bring spices, they carried ideas, technologies, and even religions. As caravans moved across the desert, they shared stories, songs, and knowledge. New tools for farming, innovations in shipbuilding, and artistic influences flowed right alongside frankincense and myrrh. And with each successful journey, power shifted. Kingdoms that controlled trade routes rose in wealth, while those cut off from them faded into obscurity. Spices were more than commodities. They were instruments of history itself. Let's pause and reflect on how much the Bible ties into this. When the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in 1 Kings 10, she brought camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones. This wasn't just a diplomatic gift. It was a declaration of alliance, a recognition that Solomon sat at the crossroads of trade. To bring spices was to bring the lifeblood of kingdoms. So why does this matter for us today? Because the echoes of those trade routes are still with us. The global spice trade didn't die. It only expanded. It fueled the age of exploration, pushing European powers to sail into uncharted oceans in search of pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg. It shaped global geography, sparked wars, and shifted the balance of empires. And today, every time you sprinkle cinnamon on your coffee or saffron in a dish, you're connecting to a legacy that stretches back to the biblical world. Archaeologists continue to uncover more pieces of this story. Ancient ports along the Red Sea, desert outposts with remnants of incense burners, and even DNA traces in plant remains that confirm the long-distance trade. Each discovery reminds us that what may seem like small details in the Bible, like a mention of frankincense or myrrh, actually open a window into the vast complexity of the ancient world. So the next time you open your spice cabinet, pause and think. These humble powders and resins once moved armies, shaped civilizations, and connected Israel to the far corners of the earth. They remind us that the Bible is not just a book of faith, it's also a record of real history, interwoven with the very trade routes that built our world. And that leaves us with one final question. If something as small as a handful of cinnamon could change the course of nations, what else hidden in Scripture might be waiting to reshape how we see history today?